Hoover Dam is one of the most recognizable structures ever built by human hands. A towering wall of concrete wedged into the walls of Black Canyon on the border of Nevada and Arizona, holding back the mighty Colorado River and the vast reservoir of Lake Mead behind it. For most people, it is a monument, a marvel of engineering, a symbol of what the nation could accomplish in the depths of the Great Depression. But Hoover Dam is not just a monument, it is a working machine, and one of its most important jobs is to make electricity. Deep inside the dam, water rushing down from Lake Mead spins massive turbines that generate power for millions of people across the American Southwest. And here is the unsettling truth that few outside the world of water and energy fully appreciate. That power is not guaranteed. As the Colorado River shrinks and Lake Mead falls, the day could come when Hoover Dam can no longer make electricity at all. If that day arrives, if Hoover Dam dies as a power plant, there are specific places, specific cities that would feel it first. This is the story of what Hoover Dam's power really does, how it could fail, and which 5 cities stand at the front of the line to lose it. The machine inside the monument, to understand what is at stake, you first have to understand how Hoover Dam actually makes its power, because the mechanism is the key to how it could fail. Hoover Dam is a hydroelectric facility, which means it generates electricity from the movement of water. Lake Mead, the reservoir behind the dam, holds an enormous volume of water at a high elevation. That water is under tremendous pressure, and when it is allowed to flow down through great pipes called penstocks built into the dam, it rushes downward with immense force. At the bottom, that rushing water strikes the blades of turbines, spinning them at high speed, and those spinning turbines drive generators that produce electricity. The power is then fed into the regional electrical grid and distributed to the cities and communities that have contracted to receive it. It is elegant, clean, and for nearly a century it has been remarkably reliable. One of the great workhorses of the Western power grid, quietly turning the weight of a river into light and cooling for millions who never think about where it comes from. The same water that is released to flow downstream toward the farms and cities of the lower Colorado does its work inside the dam on the way past, generating electricity in the very act of being delivered, so that a single flow of water serves 2 purposes at once. This is part of what made Hoover Dam such a triumph. It did not have to choose between water and power, but produced both from the same resource, wringing double value from every acre-foot that passed through it. But this entire process depends on one thing above all others: the level of the water in Lake Mead. The higher the water, the greater the pressure and the more power the dam can generate. As the water falls, the pressure drops, and the dam's ability to generate electricity declines with it. And here is the critical threshold. The intakes that feed water to the turbines sit at a particular elevation on the dam. If Lake Mead falls below the level of those intakes, water can no longer reach the turbines at all, and power generation stops completely. This point is often called minimum power pool, the lowest the reservoir can fall and still produce electricity. Below it, the turbines fall silent. There is also, far below that, the level known as dead pool, at which water can no longer pass through the dam at all, not even downstream to the cities and farms that depend on the river itself. But for the purposes of electricity, minimum power pool is the number that matters, and it sits well above dead pool, which means the dam would lose its ability to make power long before it lost its ability to pass water. The lights would be threatened before the water supply itself. Making the power the leading edge of the crisis, the first thing to fail as the reservoir declines. It is the line between a dam that makes power and a dam that cannot, and as Lake Mead has fallen through years of drought, that line has loomed larger and closer than ever before. Why Hoover Dam could die. The threat to Hoover Dam's power is not hypothetical or distant. It is rooted in the long, grinding decline of the Colorado River, the source of every drop of water in Lake Mead. The Colorado River rises in the Rocky Mountains and flows through the desert southwest, and for a century it has been the lifeblood of the entire region, supplying water to tens of millions of people and to some of the most productive farmland in the country. But the river has been overused, and in recent decades, gripped by a prolonged drought made worse by a warming climate. More water has been promised to users than the river actually carries, and the difference has been made up by draining the great reservoirs, above all, Lake Mead. The result has been a steady, alarming decline in the level of Lake Mead. Over the years of the drought, the reservoir fell toward levels never seen since it was first filled in the 20th century, its surface dropping lower and lower down the canyon walls, exposing the pale mineral band known as the bathtub ring that marks how far the water has fallen. As the water dropped, so did Hoover Dam's capacity to generate power, because with less pressure behind it, the dam could produce less electricity even while it was still running. And the specter of minimum power pool, the level at which the turbines would have to stop entirely, moved from an abstract worry to a genuine possibility that engineers and water managers began to plan for in earnest. This is what it means to say Hoover Dam could die as a power plant. It is not that the concrete would crumble or the structure would fail. It is that the water behind it could fall so low that the machine inside can no longer do its work, and the electricity it has provided for generations would simply cease. The dam would still stand, as magnificent as ever, but the power would be gone. How the power gets divided before we can identify which cities would lose Hoover Dam's power first, we have to understand how that power is distributed, because it is not sold on an open market to whoever wants it. The electricity Hoover Dam generates is allocated through long-standing contracts to specific entities across 3 states, Nevada, Arizona, and California, under an arrangement that has been in place for decades. These allocations divide the dam's output among cities, water agencies, electric utilities, and other public bodies, each entitled to a set share of the power. The largest share of Hoover Dam's electricity has historically gone to California, with substantial portions also going to Arizona and Nevada. Within those states, the power flows to a specific list of contractors, municipal utilities that serve particular cities, large water agencies that use the power to move water, and other public power entities. This matters enormously for our question, because it means that the impact of losing Hoover Dam's power would not be spread evenly or randomly across the Southwest. It would fall on the specific places that hold those allocations, the cities and agencies whose contracts entitle them to a slice of the dam's output. When we ask which cities would lose power first, we are really asking which places depend most directly and most significantly on their share of Hoover Dam's electricity, and which would feel its absence most sharply. With that framework in mind, we can look at the 5 cities that stand at the front of the line. The first city, Los Angeles. At the top of any list of places dependent on Hoover Dam's power stands Los Angeles, the great metropolis of Southern California, because the single largest block of the dam's electricity has long flowed toward the Los Angeles area and the vast urban region around it. The city's own municipal utility holds a significant allocation of Hoover power, and the broader Southern California region, through its various utilities and agencies, draws the largest regional share of the dam's output of anywhere in the 3-state system. For a city the size of Los Angeles, Hoover Dam's power is not the whole of its electricity supply. A metropolis of that scale draws on a huge and diverse array of power sources. But the dam's contribution is real and valuable, particularly because it is clean hydroelectric power that can be adjusted quickly to meet demand, making it especially useful during the peak hours of hot summer days when air conditioning drives electricity use to its highest. Losing Hoover Dam's power would mean losing a meaningful, flexible, and clean chunk of the supply that helps keep the lights on and the air conditioners running across the region. The city would have to replace that power from other sources, very likely at greater cost and with a heavier environmental footprint, and the loss of that flexible hydroelectric capacity would remove a valuable tool for managing the grid during the moments of highest stress. Los Angeles sits first on this list because it holds the largest stake, and the largest stake means the largest loss. The second city, Las Vegas. If Los Angeles holds the largest share, Las Vegas holds perhaps the most symbolically fitting one, because the glittering city of the Nevada desert sits practically in the shadow of the dam that helps power it. Las Vegas is only a short drive from Hoover Dam, and the state of Nevada holds a substantial allocation of the dam's electricity, a portion of which flows toward the Las Vegas metropolitan area and the surrounding communities of southern Nevada. There is a deep and fitting irony here. The city that has become a global symbol of dazzling light and around-the-clock energy consumption is powered, in part, by the very dam that rises from the desert just beyond its edge. Las Vegas is a city that runs on electricity in the most fundamental way. It sits in one of the hottest inhabited regions of the country, where air conditioning is not a luxury but a necessity for survival through the brutal desert summers, and its enormous resort and entertainment industry consumes power on a colossal scale. Its lights and displays and cooling systems drawing electricity around the clock. For such a city, every reliable source of power matters, and its share of Hoover Dam's clean hydroelectricity is a valuable part of the mix. To lose it would force southern Nevada to lean harder on other sources to meet its relentless demand, particularly during the peak of summer, when the grid is most strained and the danger of falling short is greatest. Given its proximity to the dam and its total dependence on cooling in a merciless climate, Las Vegas stands squarely among the cities that would feel the loss of Hoover Dam's power first and most keenly. The third city, Boulder City, the third city on this list, is one that most people outside the region have never heard of, but its place here is almost poetic, because Boulder City, Nevada owes its very existence to Hoover Dam. Boulder City was built in the early 1930s specifically to house the thousands of workers who constructed the dam, a planned community created from nothing in the desert to serve the great project. It has a unique and intimate relationship with the dam, unlike any other community, and it holds its own direct allocation of Hoover Dam's electricity, a connection that reaches back to the dam's very origins. Boulder City is a small city, far smaller than the great metropolises elsewhere on this list. But its dependence on Hoover power is proportionally significant, and its historical bond with the dam is unmatched. The community that was born to build the dam remains linked to it through the power it receives, and for a small municipality, its share of that clean, low-cost hydroelectricity is a meaningful part of its energy supply and its identity. Were Hoover Dam to stop generating, Boulder City would lose a source of power woven into the very fabric of its existence, a small but telling example of how deeply the dam is embedded in the life of the communities around it. Its inclusion on this list is a reminder that the impact of losing Hoover Dam's power would reach not only the giant cities, but the small ones, including the very town that the dam itself called into being. The fourth city, Phoenix. The fourth city brings us to Arizona, the state that shares the dam with Nevada and holds a substantial allocation of its power, and to Phoenix, the sprawling desert metropolis that anchors the state and stands as one of the largest cities in the entire country. Arizona's share of Hoover Dam's electricity flows to various entities within the state and the greater Phoenix area. As the dominant population and economic center of Arizona sits among the places that benefit from and depend upon that power. Phoenix, like Las Vegas, is a city defined by its heat. It sits in the Sonoran Desert, where summer temperatures routinely soar past 110 degrees, and where air conditioning is the thin line between a livable city and a deadly one. A metropolis of millions in such a climate has an enormous and non-negotiable appetite for electricity, especially through the long, blistering summer, when cooling demand pushes the grid to its limits. Every reliable source of power is precious in such a place, and the clean hydroelectricity from Hoover Dam is a valuable contribution to keeping the region cool and functioning. The loss of that power would compound the challenges Phoenix already faces as one of the hottest and fastest growing major cities in the nation, forcing it to find replacement electricity precisely when the stakes of a reliable supply are at their highest. As a great desert city, utterly dependent on cooling, drawing on Arizona's share of the dam's output, Phoenix earns its place among the cities that would feel the loss of Hoover Dam's power first. The fifth city, Henderson, the fifth and final city, returns us to southern Nevada, to Henderson, the second largest city in the state, and a major community in the Las Vegas metropolitan area, because Nevada's substantial allocation of Hoover power serves the broader region of which Henderson is a central part. Henderson has grown from a wartime industrial town into one of the largest and fastest growing cities in Nevada, a sprawling suburban city just southeast of Las Vegas, and, like Boulder City, situated close to the dam itself. Henderson shares the fundamental conditions that place its neighbors on this list. It sits in the same brutal desert climate, with the same total dependence on air conditioning to make life possible through the scorching summers, and the same relentless demand for electricity that comes with being a large and growing city in one of the hottest parts of the country. As part of the southern Nevada region served by the state's allocation of Hoover Dam's power, Henderson would share in the loss if the dam's turbines fell silent, forced along with the rest of the region to make up the shortfall from other sources at exactly the times of greatest demand. Its inclusion rounds out a picture in which the communities closest to the dam and most dependent on cooling, clustered in southern Nevada and reaching across to California and Arizona, stand together at the front of the line to lose the power that Hoover Dam has provided for generations. Why these cities and not others it is worth pausing to explain why this particular set of 5 cities stands at the front of the line, and why so many of them cluster in the desert southwest rather than being scattered evenly across the country. Because the answer reveals something important about how Hoover Dam's power works and who is truly exposed to its loss. The electricity from Hoover Dam does not travel across the whole nation. It serves a defined regional footprint across the 3 states that share the dam, and within that footprint, the power flows to the specific contractors who hold allocations. So the cities most exposed are, almost by definition, the ones inside that footprint that hold significant shares and depend heavily on the electricity they receive. But there is a second factor that sharpens the exposure of these particular cities, and it is climate. 4 of the 5, Las Vegas, Boulder City, Phoenix, and Henderson, sit in the searing deserts of the Southwest, where the demand for electricity is driven above all by the relentless need for air conditioning, in a climate where summer temperatures routinely exceed 110 degrees. Cooling is not optional, it is survival, and it consumes electricity on a massive scale precisely during the hottest hours of the hottest days. This means these cities are not only dependent on Hoover Dam's power by contract, but especially vulnerable to losing the kind of flexible peak matching power the dam provides. Because their moments of greatest need line up exactly with the moments when that flexible power is most valuable. Los Angeles, while more temperate, holds the largest allocation of all, and anchors a vast region whose summer demand is likewise enormous. So the 5 cities on this list are the intersection of 2 things: a significant stake in the dam's output and a deep, climate-driven dependence on reliable power during peak demand. That intersection is what places them first in line. What losing the power would actually mean now that we have identified the 5 cities, it is worth being clear and honest about what losing Hoover Dam's power would and would not mean, because it is easy to slip into apocalyptic imaginings that do not match the reality. If Hoover Dam stopped generating electricity, the cities on this list would not suddenly go dark. The lights would not flicker out across Los Angeles or Las Vegas overnight. This is a crucial point to understand. Each of these cities and regions draws its electricity from many sources, of which Hoover Dam is only one, and the loss of the dam's power would be a serious blow to the supply, but not an instantaneous blackout. The grid would continue to function, drawing more heavily on its other resources to make up the difference. What the loss would mean is subtler, but still serious. Hoover Dam provides a particular kind of power that is especially valuable, and its absence would be felt in specific ways. First, it is clean, renewable hydroelectric power, so losing it would mean replacing it with electricity from other sources that are very often more polluting and more costly, setting back the region's environmental goals and raising the price of power. Second, and crucially, hydroelectric power is flexible and can be ramped up and down almost instantly to match demand, which makes it extraordinarily valuable for stabilizing the grid and meeting sudden peaks in electricity use. This is precisely the kind of power that is most useful during the searing summer afternoons when air conditioning demand across the desert Southwest surges to its highest, and it is exactly then that its loss would be felt most acutely, removing a key tool for keeping the grid stable at its moments of greatest stress. Losing Hoover Dam's power would make the electricity supply of these cities more expensive, more polluting, and less flexible, and it would strip away a source of reliability at the very times when reliability matters most. There is also a financial dimension that reaches beyond electricity. The revenue generated by selling Hoover Dam's power helps fund important programs and operations across the Colorado River system. If that power revenue disappeared, it would undermine the funding for efforts tied to managing the river and its infrastructure, adding another layer of consequence to the loss. And the loss of the dam's power would be, in a profound sense, a symbolic blow as well. A sign that the long decline of the Colorado River had crossed a threshold from a slow-moving worry into a concrete, tangible failure. A moment when one of the great engineering achievements of the 20th century could no longer do the job it was built to do. That symbolism would carry its own weight, a warning to the entire region that the water crisis had reached a new and more dangerous stage. The slow decline behind the threat. To fully appreciate how real this threat is, it helps to understand that the decline that endangers Hoover Dam's power did not happen suddenly and is not likely to reverse quickly. It is the product of forces that have been building for a very long time and that continue to press on the river year after year. The Colorado River was divided among the states nearly a century ago, in an agreement based on measurements taken during an unusually wet period, so that from the very beginning more water was promised to users than the river reliably carries. For decades, that gap was hidden, papered over by the enormous reserves of water stored in Lake Mead and the other great reservoirs, which could be drawn down in dry years to cover the shortfall. The system was, in effect, living off its savings. But savings run out, and over the long drought that has gripped the region, the withdrawals have steadily exceeded the deposits, drawing the reservoirs down toward levels that expose the underlying imbalance. Layered on top of the original over-allocation is the warming climate, which is reducing the river's flow still further by pulling more moisture out of the snowpack and the soil, so that even the water the river once reliably delivered is diminishing. The result is a downward trajectory that a single wet winter can interrupt but not fundamentally reverse. Each good year buys time, each dry year spends it. And Hoover Dam's power sits directly in the path of this decline, because the electricity depends on the level of Lake Mead, and the level of Lake Mead depends on a river that is, over the long run, giving less and less. This is why the threat to the dam's power is not a passing worry, but a structural one, tied to forces that will continue to shape the region for decades to come. The possibility that the turbines could one day stop is not a freak scenario, but the logical endpoint of a decline that has been underway for years and shows no sign of ending on its own. The deeper warning the story of Hoover Dam's power and of the 5 cities that would lose it first is ultimately a story about the deep and often invisible connections between water and energy in the American West, and about the fragility that lurks beneath the region's remarkable achievements. Hoover Dam represents the marriage of water and power, a structure that stores the water the desert Southwest depends on and, in the same motion, generates the electricity that helps keep its cities running. That dual role is what makes the dam so important, and it is also what makes the threat to it so revealing, because the same force that threatens the water supply, the shrinking of the Colorado River, threatens the power supply as well. They rise and fall together, bound by the level of a single reservoir. The cities on this list, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Boulder City, Phoenix, and Henderson, are not just arbitrary points on a map. They represent the human reality of that connection, the millions of people whose lives are touched, in ways they may never realize, by the level of the water in a reservoir behind a dam in the desert. Most residents of these cities have no idea that some of their electricity comes from Hoover Dam, or that its continued flow depends on a river hundreds of miles away that has been shrinking for decades. That invisibility is part of the danger, because a threat that is not seen is a threat that is not prepared for. The slow decline of the Colorado River has been unfolding for years, largely out of the daily awareness of the people it will most affect, and the possibility that Hoover Dam could one day cease to make power is a concrete and understandable illustration of just how much is at stake in that decline. None of this means that catastrophe is inevitable. The level of Lake Mead can rise as well as fall, and a good year of snow and rain in the Rocky Mountains can push the reservoir back up and pull the dam away from the brink, buying time. The states that share the Colorado River have been working, through difficult and contentious negotiations, to reduce their use of the water and to stabilize the reservoirs, and every gallon saved and every foot of elevation preserved helps keep Hoover Dam generating and keeps the power flowing to the cities that depend on it. There is also enormous investment underway in other sources of electricity across the region, which over time can reduce the dependence on any single source, including the dam. The future is not written, and the story of Hoover Dam's power is still being decided by the choices the region makes and the weather the mountains deliver. But the warning stands, clear and sobering. Hoover Dam, the great monument of the desert, is a working machine whose power depends on a river that is running short, and if that river falls far enough. The day could come when the turbines stop and the electricity ends. When that day comes, it will be Los Angeles and Las Vegas, Boulder City and Phoenix and Henderson that stand first in line to feel it, the 5 cities bound most closely to the dam and most dependent, in the end, on the power it makes. Their story is a reminder that even the greatest marvels we build are only as secure as the natural systems that sustain them, and that in the American West, the fate of the cities and the fate of the river have always